when you engage with the child in play, especially, it lights up their brain like no other. And so that's really what we want to do in therapy is make sure that we're really hitting all of those areas that light up a child's brain and help them to grow and develop in the most opportune way possible.
Alrighty, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Therapy Unmasked. Today, as always, I'm joined by Nick Sidwell, the owner of Ability Innovations.
Hi, everybody.
And we have a special guest also, this cute little light bulb here. His name is Billy the Bulb, and he was actually made by one of Nick's kiddos that he sees here at the clinic. So,
special shout out. We'll probably put a link like that to this kid's Etsy shop.
Oh, he's got them on Etsy.
He's got an
stuff.
Etsy shop, so we can put a link to that in the what do you call that? The bio.
We recently just did the Safe Kids event over at Northridge High School, and we commissioned our little friend to make a bunch of these little light bulbs that when you press them, they click.
They're little clickers.
And they were a hot commodity. People loved them there. So, and then he also went out of his way to make us this big guy here, which we think is pretty sweet. Anyway, we'll go back into the topic at hand, which today, Nick, we're going to be discussing progress through play. So when you see our logo and things like that, typically we'll put progress through play underneath. That's kind of like our tagline, because that is kind of the core of what we do is we help children and kids achieve their goals, their developmental milestones, their gross motor milestones through play.
Yeah, through play. And it's really interesting because one of the things that we learn as occupational therapists is that play and leisure time is a part of what makes us human beings. And for kids, it's a major part of who they are. You know, that's how they learn almost everything. Even in the animal kingdom, you see animals playing with each other, and that's how they kind of hone the skills that they need to be fully functioning adult animals.
And what's super cool about Ability Innovations and our sister company, Children in Motion, is Nick has been able to translate these play-based tactics that are used for occupational therapy, and he's managed to find speech therapists and physical therapists that are able to do the same thing.
And it's kind of unique because, you know, one of the things as we've networked with other clinics like ours around the country, we've gotten the question like, how do you get your therapist to do more than just sit in a room and work with the kids? Like, how do you get them to play? Like, maybe it's the speech language pathologist, because they're saying like, we just get them to have their room and they sit at a table and they're not really engaging the kids, and the kids want to be in that sensory room on the swings, and the therapists aren't always keen with that. But I think the key has been finding therapists that understand that research and understand how to engage kids in a way that's authentic. So it's been quite a journey for us, but it's been pivotal in what we do. One of the things that we show at Children in Motion is they've got this kind of pie chart on the wall in almost every room and throughout their clinic. And I love it because it's based in research and it's what makes therapy successful according to the research. And the large part of it is that kids come to therapy and they have fun. They relate well with their therapist. And most of that happens through play. If that is the largest portion of what makes therapy successful, then as clinics throughout the country and throughout the world, we need to be addressing what really makes therapy successful, and that's connecting well with the children. And when you do what they want to do, you're connecting with them. And then it's just figuring out how to shape that into the goal areas that we're going to talk about.
Yeah, for sure. And that kind of segues into my first point that we wanted to talk about, which is this is kind of a question we get all the time from parents that come here, which is, how can I tell if my child is just playing or if they're learning and doing therapy?
Right. And how do I justify in my mind as a parent that my kid is coming and playing and it looks like these therapists are just playing with my kid, and they don't always see the deeper part of what we're doing. And it is very based in research. Some of the research that came out, I think starting in the 90s, the 80s and 90s, really honed in on what is it that causes natural development. And some of the the programs that are based on this are like, they're called DIR FloorTime or the Play Project. And these researchers were doctors and psychologists, and they really looked hard into what actually works with kids. Like, we know that we can train their brains to do certain things, and we can work with kids, follow special developmental patterns that we see, but what actually drives those things? And what they found is that when you engage with a child in play, especially, it lights up their brain like no other. And so that's really what we want to do in therapy is make sure that we're really hitting all of those areas that light up a child's brain and help them to grow and develop in the most opportune way possible.
You mentioned DIR FloorTime and the Play Project. Going along with that is we have made it a point at Children in Motion and Ability Innovations to make sure that all of our therapists take a play-based training
Yeah, they're all certified.
that we've created in-house, which is heavily based off of a lot of those scientific principles that you find in DIR FloorTime and the Play Project.
I'm looking at the research from Stanley Greenspan and others, that they took this research and they said, okay, here's the finer points of this, that real play has to be child-led. It has to come from the child, and it can't be so scripted or so planned out that it's too rigid and it's not real play. So it has to be authentic to the child and be child-led. And other things are, it has to follow developmental milestones. So we've talked a lot about that on this podcast, about milestones, and that's what we heavily do. And you should be able to lead kids through, you should be able to recognize, first of all, what milestones they're in and where they're at developmentally, and then create a plan that happens through play to reach those next milestones. And how do you elicit those things? And the research is pretty clear about all of that. Like, through play, you can start cementing in those milestones and then reaching to the next ones just by pushing and tweaking a little bit here and there. And our therapists are experts at that because we've done that certification and we've done those trainings to where they understand these principles, and that's what they're helping lead the kids through. Even though it might not look like we're leading the kids, we're molding and shaping in small little ways that get them to where they need to be. And the kids don't recognize it. They think, oh, you know, when a kid comes in, we're like, hey, do you want to play this? And the kid's like, no, I want to do those over there. And they might point to something. And so we might have to shift on the fly and say, okay, let's do that. And now what if we did it like this? And the kid's like, yeah, that's so fun. And that's how we're molding and shaping. So we're not changing what they really want to do, but we're just pushing it in certain directions to where it meets goal areas.
And that's something we see all the time here is our therapists are really good at adapting to those different situations.
And you kind of have to be. You have to be on your feet with kids the whole time, because you might be sitting on the floor at one point, running over here, or other kids are just really into certain things. Like, I've laid on a crash pad with a kid and played with the zipper on the crash pad for 20 minutes. And for me, it wasn't like super engaging, but for that kid, it meant something. And we've used just a simple activity like getting a zipper to go back and forth. We've used that over and over and then pushed that into different milestones. And it's really amazing when that's what the kid wants to do, and we follow that through with them. And there's a quote that I love too, where they say that if you do what a kid wants to do, they love you for it.
Say there's like a certain thing that one of our therapists needs to work on. I'll just take like handwriting, for example, fine motor skills. But this kid really just does not like working on fine motor skills, and they just do not like handwriting. How would you, as a play-based OT, keep this kid engaged and interested in developing those necessary fine motor skills?
Yeah, there's definitely activities like that are kind of aversive to kids. And I had an experience just recently, I think it was just last week, where a kid came in and it's really hard to get him to handwrite or to do any kind of writing stuff. If I just suggested, if I'm like, hey, let's go write this on this board or on this paper, he's like, no, I don't want to do that. It was interesting because he came in and he was really into this video. And it was kind of, he's an older kid, so it was kind of like a conspiracy, like mystery kind of video. And he's like, what do you think this means? And we talked about it and we watched a little bit of the video. And I was like all in on it with him. And I was like, ooh, this is kind of spooky. And, we're going through this video. And then at one point he's like, did you see that? And I was like, what? I didn't see anything. And so he pauses the video and goes back a little bit. And there's this code at the bottom of the video that's in Morse code, because the video was talking about how these characters did Morse code. And so it's written out in Morse code, like dots and dashes. And I was like, what is that? And he's like, it's a code. I'm like, we should uncode it. I bet you we could find Morse code online and we could decipher it. And he was all in on it, right? So he's getting really excited because he's going to find out what this hidden message in this video is. So we write it out on a piece of paper, all the dots and dashes. He wrote out all the dots and dashes. And then we pulled up a paper that had Morse code on it, and he started to decipher it. Very age appropriate, authentic to him. But all of a sudden he's writing. And he starts with something really basic. It was kind of a warm up, these dots and dashes. And then he starts writing letters. And it was all prompted by the kid. And it was because I was interested in what he was interested in. And I shaped and molded that like, hey, we could decipher this. And I just prompted that just a little bit. And then he went for it. And he hook, line, and sinker jumped into it. We found the paper, we found the pencils, and something that was aversive to him before was now super interesting to him because it was in a way that he really wanted to explore it. It didn't come from me. As the therapist, I wasn't the one suggesting this. It was me saying that we could do this and figure out this other thing. And so for this kid, and for lots of kids, there's ways of getting them to these even aversive areas, or if handwriting is not their favorite, there's other ways of addressing it and approaching it. I've had kids that will write on a balloon with a marker. And hey, that's handwriting. It's still handwriting. And, they're filling up a balloon with air and then they're writing stuff on it. And then we play with the balloon back and forth. But I just got them to handwrite. And granted, it's not with paper and pencil, but we're still working on a lot of those handwriting skills. We do all kinds of things like that in therapy here at Ability Innovations and at Children in Motion, where, we may not approach it the traditional or the typical way, but that's because it's coming from the kids. It's something beautiful coming from the kids.
That's awesome. I love that, Nick. That's so cool. So say we have a parent that wants to get their kid into therapy and they want to know, how long is this going to take? Like, is my kid even capable of reaching these milestones? Like, what kind of reassurances do we give parents, especially when it comes to this play-based method that we use?
Yeah, sometimes it's going to take a while. And I think some parents come in and they're a little concerned because they're like, hey, you're not really addressing these goal areas. You're just playing. And that might seem like to parents that we're stretching out the therapy sessions. And the reality is when we're doing therapy, we're creating neural pathways. We have to build these neural pathways. And how long does it take to build a dendrite or a neural pathway from the brain to whatever area that we need to light up in the brain? There has to be some kind of network in there. And the way that we do that is through repeated exposure of some kind of stimulus. If we were just doing it in therapy sessions, for example, we're hitting it once a week and we might hit it multiple times in that session, but that once a week isn't enough, right? And so if they're doing it at home and they're getting repeated exposure several times a week, then we know that that's going to take about 9 to 12 months to build that neural pathway. If they were doing it every day, it might be shorter, but sometimes that's really tedious for kids to be working on something every day, multiple times a day. So realistically, it's like 9 to 12 months that they're going to be in therapy and they're going to be working on these things. And it's all dependent on kids too. Like some kids develop really quickly. Some kids pick things up really quickly. Others, it takes a little bit longer. And we always reassure parents that progress is progress. Sometimes progress goes up and down, but it's still progress. Sometimes it happens really slowly and gradually it just starts creeping up and getting better, but it's still progress. Yeah. I think that's one of the things that insurance companies don't like either. But when we're doing habilitation, we're working on something that has never been learned before instead of relearning it, which is called rehabilitation. If they're learning it for the first time, they're working on habilitation. It's going to take a while. for those connections to happen in the brain. And so we have to reassure parents that, what we're doing is exposing them through repeated stimulus over and over. And that's going to take about 9 to 12 months for those connections to be made and for that true learning to happen.
Because you're not fixing a connection, you're creating a connection, which is very different.
And you think about, like, as adults, if you were to have a nerve severed, I've had that before, where a nerve has either broken or it's been severed by something, some kind of injury. It took me 6 months to get feeling back in that area because of that nerve break. And my body had to regrow that nerve in that area, reconnect all of those pathways. And so it was 6 months before that really happened. And we're talking about that happening in the brain. And sometimes it happens really quickly, but it still took 6 months for that to happen in my hand. You have to be aware that the body does what the body does, and we're not always in charge of that.
But you can help guide it, like you said, with creating those neural pathways.
And therapy is not a quick fix, but we do what is proven by research, and we're sticking to what really works, and we're hoping for the best. But sometimes, we just have to be patient with progress. For example, feeding. When we do feeding therapy or feeding sessions with kids, that's going to take a long time because we're not only fighting neural pathways and the time it takes for that, but there's also anxiety built up in a lot of that. So sometimes there's these huge hurdles that we have to get through and get that stimulus in there. And it takes a while, and it can be very, taxing to your patients.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I hope parents understand that we're really doing what works, but it's going to take a while. There's no quick fixes in therapy.
So now that we've kind of discussed what play-based therapy is, what it looks like, how progress is made. So how do we measure that progress? I know insurance companies, they typically require our therapists to take detailed notes and then submit it with the claim, and that's how we get paid. But I mean, is that the best way? Are there other ways that we measure progress? Like, I know we do tests sometimes. Maybe you want to speak to that a little?
Yeah. I mean, we usually start with some kind of basal scores, and we say, like, this is where they were at when they started. And then over time, we might do some testing or assessments that might say, okay, based on those basal scores, they've risen this much. Parents don't always get to see that. That's more for insurance companies, that they might ask for some of that. I think what parents are really looking for is something that really is fluid, that they can understand what the progress is looking like. I wish we could just kind of plot things out on a bar graph and say, look, they're making progress. It doesn't always look like that. Or some therapies like speech therapy, you can easily track that. Sometimes for physical therapy, for occupational therapy, it's a little trickier. If you were to look at our daily notes that we write, it talks a lot about the specific things that we're doing and we're targeting, and the areas of concern that we're addressing, and the parts of the goals that we're looking at, and then maybe how much they were engaged in that activity or how many times they were able to successfully do something. And over time, unless you were looking at like all of it in one chunk and you were saying like from here to here, they were able to do this, but from here to here, it looked like this. That's really hard to assimilate and compile together as a parent. But one of the things that we're really working on is how could we express this to parents in a more salient way? And we're actually creating an app that will give parents that kind of information. And it's based on milestones, and you can see how your kid is progressing through those milestones. And you can even add to some of that. Like, hey, at home, we saw this now. You can chart their progress back and forth with the therapist. And it's very interactive. And we hope that kind of thing will help parents understand and see more of what we're trying to do and how we're achieving goals. Because if we just like sent parents the notes, it probably wouldn't go very well. They wouldn't know how to look at the notes each and every day, and nor would they want to. For a couple of weeks of looking at the notes, they would get kind of tired of seeing all of them and not really be able to piece it together. But as therapists, what we're tracking is certain levels of milestones or or different areas that they should be meeting. And it's all sequential. So all milestones are building off of each other. They have to get to these first ones and close this kind of group of milestones before they get to this next level. The research that comes from like Dr. Stanley Greenspan, for example, he's characterized these things into different levels, and he's got maybe 6 levels that he really focuses on in his work. And we've used some of that as well. And we can pinpoint, hey, this kid is in level 3, and these are the things that we're working on. And we come back in a few months and we say, okay, now this kid is in level 4. These are the things that we're working on. And there still might be some holes in 3 that we're trying to close up, but definitely working on these higher level skills. And we can chart those things as therapists, and we know and understand where the kid is at and how well they're progressing and how well they're developing. But sometimes the parents kind of have to ask us that, like, what are you seeing with progress? And hopefully one day when we get this app done, that kind of information will just go back and forth between the therapist and the parent. If you're sitting at home thinking like, I would love that, ask us about it. Maybe you could help us trial it out and see if it works for you. Like I said, it's very interactive with the parents. They get to put things in that they're seeing at home. And that's the piece that we don't always get in there.
So the app is called The Village Path. It's right now we're piloting it with Children in Motion, our sister company. And I can put a link to it in the description, and feel free to check it out. Anyone can sign up, even if you're not receiving therapy at Children in Motion. Right now we're just like working through everything, making sure it works great. And I think it is a great way for you as a parent or caregiver to track the progress and see like in real time what's happening with your child.
And there is a little bit of a cost to it because of that interaction and that communication back and forth with the therapist. Like there needs to be some kind of compensation in there so that the therapist's time is being accounted for. It might change a lot of what we do in therapy. I think it would change a lot of what we do in therapy across the board, but it also helps to have a little bit more of a connection with your therapist, which I think a lot of parents are probably looking for. I mean, if you had a therapist on call, I've got some parents that I do this with, but they're like, hey, we're seeing this at home. Do you have any recommendations for this? And I haven't seen their kid in years, but they still feel comfortable enough to contact me and just ask me a quick question like that. And if we could get that kind of communication back and forth consistently and have the time available to do that, it could really change therapy in such an amazing way. But insurance companies make that hard.
Right.
Because the only way that we're getting paid usually for therapy is through insurance companies. And they put restrictions on how much of that communication and interaction goes back and forth simply by what they pay for and what they don't.
Yeah. And that's sad, but that's the reality we live in.
If parents are willing to help compensate for some of that time, I think there could be a lot more progress and a lot more stuff going on with therapist communication and what you're able to do with therapy.
So we've talked about tracking progress. We've talked about what play-based therapy is, how we implement it, all that stuff. But you did mention something earlier in this podcast episode, which is that when kids are just coming to therapy, they're not really going to be seeing a ton of results. And that's because it takes a lot of repetition. And where's that repetition going to happen? It's probably going to happen at home.
I mean, as an occupational therapist, when we're looking at what makes a kid successful, we're looking at occupations, with the little activities that they do in their daily life. And we get this little window of time that we get to spend with the kids. And we see some of those occupations, some of those activities, some of the ways that they're growing. We don't get privy to a lot of their time. And so what they're doing at home is hugely pivotal. And we want parents to really work with some of the things that we're doing in therapy. And a lot of the parents do. Like we're going to them and we're saying like, if they're in the session, we're saying, hey, did you see what we did here? Can you do that at home and really work on that? Or we're going to them after, like maybe their kid just doesn't do well with them looking in on the session. And so they stay in the waiting room, and that's great too. And then we try and really connect with those parents afterwards and say, hey, we worked really hard on this, and this was really hard for your kid. And if you can work on this a few times throughout this week, or, we specify like, maybe this needs to be something that you hit every day or right before homework, do this with them. If we can get that kind of involvement, on a continual basis, it really makes a huge difference for the kid because, like we're saying, we're building neural pathways, and that repeated exposure is what really cements it in. And then there's another concept of generalization. So sometimes kids compartmentalize what we're doing and they're like, oh, I only do that at therapy. And they know that they only work on that with this person or at this place. They don't want to do it other places. But what they realize is, oh, maybe it's speech. Maybe I have to work on my speech skills with my parents, with my teacher, with my therapist, with my grandma, with my friends. And that's where they really learn to cement those things in because they generalize it across several different environments. And it really makes that skill like hone in and cement into their skill set. That goes along with everything else too. It's not just speech. If they're working on these skills in therapy, but they're doing it across multiple environments with multiple people, then it really makes a huge difference.
I think our therapists are really good at showing parents how they can incorporate therapy into the child's daily routine.
Yeah.
So it's not like you would have to go out of the way to do some of these things. A lot of it is maybe the child needs like deep pressure or something, and they can incorporate that like before bed or like as they're leaving the house, just like different points in the day where the child may need some form of regulation or whatever it is.
Already doing something, and this can be part of that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And we don't want to be a burden on parents. We know that family life can be stressful, or that sometimes you're just in a hurry and you've got several kids and you got to keep going. And so, you might not be able to take time out of your day to do specific things. And sometimes we're saying if you can just work this in like 5 minutes a day, perfect. I think anybody can work in 5 or 10 minutes a day of something, right? But like you were saying, if you can insert it into their day, like there's some kind of trigger, like right before bed, after they brush their teeth, have them do this. And, if you can fit that in and it can become part of your day, then it's not intrusive. If there's exercises that you've got to do and we're just saying, hey, if you can just do this for 40 minutes a day, it's going to be overwhelming. I've seen parents where they're like, I don't know if I can do that. And we see that even with adults, if they're told to do something for 40 minutes, but it's just exposure. So if they're exposed to this at little points throughout their day, it can work wonders. And the hidden secret behind some of the things that we're doing is that the skills that are underlying in some of these areas that we're working on, they can be triggered by anything. So we'll take like sensory, for example. If they're working on some kind of sensory thing, it can be part of their wake-up routine. It can be part of meals. It can be part of going to bed. It can be part of any kind of their hygiene kinds of things. You can incorporate it into so much throughout their day that it doesn't have to be strictly like sitting at a table and using this material to do this. It doesn't have to be that. Handwriting is another one of those. If they've got a stylus in their hand, I tell parents this a lot. If they've got a stylus in their hand, they're handwriting. And it might be just tapping the stylus on a screen to do something, but holding that stylus is working on handwriting skills. It's the skills that are underlying it. And if they get familiar with how to use a stylus or a pencil and how to target with their eyes and their hands and coordinating that back and forth, that's handwriting.
That's actually a good idea. Yeah. Because a lot of kids like using technology.
Kids want to use the phone.
Instead of using the finger, replace it with a stylus.
Yeah. And kids think that kind of stuff is cool. And I've even told parents like those boogie boards that it's just a writing tablet and then you click a button and it erases it. Kids think those are so fun and they'll just color on them and draw little pictures, and it's an electronic tablet, but they're actually working on handwriting. So if you get them one of those, and they're relatively cheap, and you just throw it in your purse or in a diaper bag, and kids are playing with that in the car or whatever, they're working on handwriting skills and they don't even know it. They just think it's kind of a fun little electronic device that their parent is letting them have. So it doesn't have to be a screen even, but a stylus. And even eating, if they've got like a toothpick and they're stabbing their blueberries with the toothpick and eating that, that's also working on those handwriting skills. and the kid doesn't even know.
That is so cool. And that's why you need to talk to an OT, because normal people like me
they don't see that and go, they're eating blueberries with a toothpick. Like, what is that really working on? Like, I want them to work on handwriting. And little did you know that we are. I think parents would be amazed if they said, okay, you were doing this. What kinds of skills is this working on? And then all of a sudden the therapist is spitting out like, oh, they're doing this and they're doing this with their eyes and they're doing this like hand-eye coordination. And I don't know if you noticed, but while they were doing that, they were balancing and they were doing this. And like we start pulling out all of these skill areas that they're working on, and parents were like, oh, I just thought you were throwing paper airplanes. That's what it looks like. But there's so many skills that are involved in that. And this helps with this. And so there's all these connections that are in a therapist's mind. That's what we're taught in school is how do we work on these skills? But we don't always articulate or verbalize those to the parents.
Right. And that's why I think this app that we're creating is going to be such a huge leap in that, because it will help keep the therapist and the parent and the child all on the same page as to what they're doing. So.
And in a more salient way. I think that's the key. I mean, if we're working with play with kids, it's going to be a more salient way. They're going to enjoy it. It's speaking their language. And if we can get the communication back and forth to the parent through the app, it's salient. They don't have to go in and ask for it and go to therapy all the time. They can send a quick message to the therapist. The therapist can respond back. They can put information on the little tracker. The therapist can do the same, and you can see them real time. Like, it can be really amazing.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, we've talked about a lot of great stuff, but I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up. Thanks for all your input and knowledge, Nick. We really appreciate what you do here.
And you guys at home, thanks for trusting us with your kids and letting us be part of the village that helps children.
Therapy Unmasked, as always, is brought to you by Ability Innovations and Children in Motion and the great work that we do here. Feel free to click the links in our description here and check out any of the free resources we have available to you, like worksheets and blogs and articles and all that stuff. And then we also have paid resources that can help maybe take therapy a next step further. Like we talked about the app earlier, we also have Therapy Unmasked courses, all of those different things. I will link that below, but all of those purchases and everything goes towards helping us and what we do here and our therapists who do this amazing work to help kids reach their goals and milestones through play. Other than that, we're all good to end the episode today, and we will see you in the next episode of Therapy Unmasked. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.